Welcome to the Covert Access Team podcast. This episode dives into the practical side of physical auditing, how it works, how it differs from classic pen testing, and why the order in which you test vulnerabilities can make or break an engagement. We've talked about auditing before, but with our physical audit certification training coming up this weekend, the topic's been top of mind, and it's a subject that is always relevant. Today we're talking with CAT Chief Instructor Brian Harris. Brian, you've been teaching and refining this model in the field for years. So let's start with the basics. For people who already know what a pen test is, how would you define physical security auditing in one sentence, and what makes it different from classical physical pen testing?
So I don't think I can answer it in a single sentence, but because, it's a little ambitious. But the idea here is that when you run a pen test, you're trying to test what's likely to succeed for infiltration, right? The covert methods of entry, getting in various routes. Auditing is you are trying to identify every single last vulnerability, chain them into routes, and then figure out remediations for them.
But the point is you're not being stealthy at all.
Right, you don't be stealthy because you show up just like any other employee, right? You ideally will show up before employees show up because you want to see employee behavior. Are they tailgating? Are they leaving doors open? This sort of thing. Because again, auditing in this context is not a compliance check. It's not coming in saying, okay, you have the right fences, you have the right cameras. What you're doing is you're looking at every vulnerability and every possible route through the lens of an attacker and saying, how would I have capitalized on this if I was running a pen test or if somebody was trying to break in, either as an outside threat or an inside threat? Because let's be honest, it's not always the bad guy in the balaclava outside the building. Sometimes it's the insider, sometimes it's the janitor, sometimes it's the employee, So, and at the same time, even if you do break into a building, especially covertly, and you're trying to impersonate an employee, well, then you've got effectively an insider threat, okay? And is your security set up in a way that if an employee turned rogue or was tricked or bribed or anything else, that you would prevent them from doing nefarious acts? So with the audit, you're trying to map out every last possible vulnerability, chain what was likely to succeed from an attacker standpoint into routes, and then find remediations for each one.
So even though they are somewhat similar, it seems like it would require a very different mindset. So how does your mindset differ when you're doing an audit versus a physical pen test?
Honestly, for me, so maybe this is just from 20 years of doing this, but for me, the mindset doesn't really change. Because you are testing and mapping everything in both instances, right?
Well, I could see, though, for someone who's maybe a little bit newer, an audit would be so much more relaxed of a circumstance. I mean, maybe your mindset isn't different, so maybe my question was malformed. Maybe the question is, how might the mindset be different for a physical pen tester?
Right. So what I usually say is this. If you want to get into physical pen testing, the single best possible place to start is auditing. And the reason for that is that first, so there's several things that you have to understand. One, you have to know as many vulnerabilities as possible. And I mean this for everything. You need to understand doors, locks, camera systems, fences, ground sensors, access control systems, personal behavior, ID badges. You need to know all the possible things that could be taken advantage of from a bad guy. You need to figure out what are cost-effective remediations for each one if they're screwing it up. And at the same time, when you're running an audit, because there's no fear of getting caught, right? You're supposed to be there. There's no reconnaissance, so the time window gets at least cut in half, because half of the time on a pen test is recon.
Sure, in an ideal world.
Right. And then at the same time, when you're running an audit, everything that you say, hey, you know what? I bet I could use an underdoor tool on that door. Okay, go try. Hey, I bet I could shim that lock. Okay, go try. I bet that this Euro cylinder lock is vulnerable to breaking or drilling or something. Okay, go check it. Right? Maybe not actually drill or lock, but you could at least check to see. I mean, you can say, hey, you know what? I think there's a dead zone in this area. Okay, go to the security area and check to see if the camera network actually sees something. You get to test and practice every last thing that you want to practice or test. And so for you and your team, you get to move through the building, identify every last possible vulnerability. Then you get to take those vulnerabilities and say, okay, if I was a real bad guy and I had figured out all these vulnerabilities through reconnaissance, how would I take advantage of them in order to get from A to B, right? Maybe from the outside to the CEO's office or whatever the client has told you to do. And then from there, now you have the hard part. How do you fix it in a cost-effective manner? So, I mean, think about this. let's suppose for a minute that your client, during your audit, you discover that all of the employees, or at least a good chunk of them, are wearing their employee badge outside the office building.
Oops.
Right. So that's right there. That's a huge vulnerability, right? Because one of the things that I'm going to try and do is take photographs of your badge in as close as I can so that I can go and I can recreate that and print it. And because the sad reality is, even if you're running something like a Desfire awesome unclonable card, if I have a card and a lanyard that looks perfect, even if it's a piece of paper in a card holder, most of the time nobody's going to question me. And the reason they're not going to question me is because front-heavy security, right? Everybody assumes that, well, if you look the part and you've gotten past the choke point, you must be allowed to be here. So this is the problem, is that just because, okay, well, if from a compliance standpoint, you might say, we have the best cards that you could possibly buy. They're unclonable. Awesome. But if the employee holds the door open for me because I have what looks like a valid card, then it doesn't matter.
Sure.
So now, but the question is, how do you fix the employees wearing the badge outside the office, right? So that's the hard part. The hard part is not
setting best practices that they may or may not comply with.
Exactly. So the hard part is not, hey, I've identified that employees are wearing their badge outside the office. That's a vulnerability. The hard part is now convince every single one of your employees to stop it. See, this is the difference. This is the difficult part. And by the way, the vast majority of clients do not need a pen test. They need an audit. They need to get their security up to a high level before you say, well, let's see if we can break in.
Yeah, otherwise the audit will just be...
I broke in.
Yeah.
it's
12 ways.
Exactly. Honestly, so having done this for so long, the overwhelming majority of the time, the pushback I get when somebody's asking about a pen test is, well, we know you're going to get in. It's like, well, yeah, you know I'm going to get in because you could get in. Anyone could get in because you understand that your security, the current physical security is so low that anyone could get in. Girl Scouts, selling cookies could get in. It's anybody.
Well, I would let the Girl Scouts in. All right. Say you're walking up to a new site as for a physical audit. What is the first thing you do for an audit versus the first thing you do for a pen test?
Right. Okay. So again, with a pen test, with a pen test, half of your engagement time is going to be recon. And when you do a pen test, your reconnaissance should be in concentric circles, starting farthest away and then slowly getting closer, right? So your types of recon are OSINT, which is open source intelligence. What can I find about you on the internet? Now that can be done anywhere on Earth, right? So I can literally be on the other side of Earth looking at your building, right? There's no real possibility I'm going to get caught there. Then I'm going to do long range reconnaissance, right? Telescopes, telephoto lenses, that sort of thing. Maybe I'm in a hotel room and I've got a telescope and I'm trying to look at your building and things like this. Maybe I'm using a drone. Still, unlikely I'm going to get caught. Now I'm doing short range recon. Now what I'm doing is I'm walking around your building, or I'm parking in a car across the street, or I'm sitting in a cafe right across the street or something else to try and see everything that I can see. But again, the closer I get to your building, the more dangerous it is to me and my team. I'm more likely to get caught. And finally, embedded reconnaissance. Can I think of a valid or fake way of getting into your building under real or false pretexts to see what's going on inside, right? Maybe the lobby, the camera systems, the types of ID badges you're using, the choke points, etc. As I get closer, the risk to me and my team of getting caught, it drastically increases. But when you run an audit, you don't care about getting caught because that's not the point. So in day one on a pen test, you're as far away as you can possibly get, OSINT, all that kind of stuff. Day one of the audit, you show up at 9 a.m., ask for a badge, say, hey, I'm Bob, I'm here to do an audit. Right? And that's kind of the whole point. Now, in my opinion, you should definitely show up before the employees show up, because how the employees show up, where they go, what the funnel is,
would be a huge part.
It could be a huge part. And so you want to map that. You want to see all that. But fundamentally, day one of a pen test is you stay as far away from the building as possible. And day one of an audit is you just show up.
Well, and also, even once you kind of get past the recon phase of a pen test, I imagine it would still be different, because during a pen test, you're kind of starting stealthy and then you get louder and louder. Right. Whereas with an audit, you're kind of just like systematically going through the building. You
are, but even then, realize that a big chunk of security vulnerabilities are going to be human behavior, right? It doesn't matter how much physical security you have if employees just literally let you into the building.
Sure.
So you could have, I have done physical pen tests on buildings that were spending millions and millions and millions of dollars a day on security, and you can still get inside, especially if employees are helping you. and we refer to them as assets, right? If you can turn an employee into an asset, somebody who's on your team, but they don't know they're on your team, it's like, okay, then they are done. They're cooked. But with an audit, how the employees behave is a huge part of this. So I usually refer to audits as semi-covert, right? You are not trying to be covert, but you should not just show up on day one and say to every employee, I'm here to run a security audit.
And then everybody's on their best
behavior. Because everybody's
behavior.
On their best behavior. And it's like, okay, well, all the stuff they would have done and would have seen and would have said, well, now they're not going to. Right?
So you do still start quieter and get louder.
Right. So let's say I was on an audit recently, and one of the first things that I did was I showed up at site and I walked around the building. I found a stairwell going to the roof. I just walked up to the roof. I found a way to get from the roof inside the building through a series of really stupid vulnerabilities that shouldn't have been there. And then once I was inside, front heavy security, right? I'm inside the building. I look the part. I'm not acting suspicious. I must be allowed to be there. How else did I get this far inside?
Sure.
So it's one of those things that you should still start stealthy on audits. Somebody, your client contact, should know who you are, right? But one of the first things that I do if I go inside and I get a guest badge from the client contact, the first thing I do, put it away. Put it in your pocket. Because what should employees be doing? Hey, I don't know you. You're not wearing a badge. Something doesn't look right. Can
you get in without a badge?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So a lot of this, you are still doing this in a semi-covert way, right? So you might talk to employees, you might, get coffee with them, you might see if you can tailgate, all this kind of stuff.
Would you lie to employees about what you're there to do?
Yeah, sure, sometimes. I mean, you can absolutely say, oh, I'm here for this completely other purpose, right? Because remember, it's a semi-covert nature. The human element, the human factor of this is a factor, and it's a big factor. So, because there's nothing more frustrating for a facility manager or a CISO or whoever than saying, we spent millions of dollars on physical security and cybersecurity, but every other employee just lets bad people into the building and they don't care, right?
Sure.
It's an infinitely frustrating thing. So human behavior definitely has to be tested. And that's why I say, you need to show up before the employees show up. See how they're handling things. I've literally seen employees before open doors and then put a brick so that the door stays open because they think somebody's going to be coming in later with, moving stuff or whatever. And they'll just leave the door open for extremely long periods of time.
Or they do that for a cigarette break and forget to take the brick out.
Right, exactly. So it's like this human element has to be tested. But again, it's like to go back to answering your question, you want to show up, you still want to be stealthy. Your client contact needs to know who you are and that you showed up and all these kinds of things, but you still want to not let every employee know who you are and why you're there, because otherwise they're going to be on their best behavior.
Another thing that I find quite interesting for a physical audit is that you're still developing attack routes.
Yes.
To me, I guess I'm a little surprised by that. Why are you still setting routes if it's kind of a little bit more of a systematic approach, like this door, this window, this card, this,
Right.
why are routes still relevant?
Right. Okay, so let's back up a sec. What a route is a chain of vulnerabilities that you are going to take advantage of to go from A to B, right? So if you have a route that gets you from the outside of the building, and then you take advantage of several vulnerabilities, then that gets you into the CEO's office or the VIP meeting room or the server room or the archive room or whatever the crown jewels are, right? Maybe it took you 4 or 5 vulnerabilities to get from the outside of the building to the server room. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that would be your route. If you were doing a real pen test, that would be your route. Now, the reason why routes are important is because let's suppose that you have 5 vulnerabilities that take you from the outside of the building to the server room. But if I fix vulnerability number 3, the entire route falls apart.
So basically it helps you identify those pinch points that are like the number one things to remediate.
It does.
Because you may not have the budget to fix everything.
Well, you won't. You definitely won't have. Most people, the overwhelming majority of people, will not have the budget to fix every vulnerability. But this also gets to a really, really crucial problem with physical pen test reporting. Those 5 vulnerabilities that led to your route to get to from outside of the server room, right? What is the severity of each one? So, because if you say, and I've seen this happen a lot, they say, well, we had 5 vulnerabilities and every single one of them was a high or a critical vulnerability. Okay, but if you solve vulnerability 3 and the entire attack route can no longer be accomplished, were the other vulnerabilities still high? Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. Because think about it. So if I solve vulnerability 3 and suddenly that entire attack narrative can no longer occur, then if you said that all 5 of them were high vulnerabilities or high severity, then were they? So the other aspect of this is it does 2 things. The attack route will help you to, as the auditor, it will help you to identify what is a bad person actually likely to do. What is an attacker actually likely to take advantage of, right? Because if you say something outlandish, well, I found a stairwell that gets me to the top of the roof, and then if I rappel down here and I use a glass cutter to go through, okay, that's
Sure.
fine, but that's a little out there, right? So, but if you say, well, Sally always leaves the back door opened after lunch to go smoke, and then she forgets to close it, these are both vulnerabilities, but these are very, very different things.
And Bob and Sally be causing all kinds of problems.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea here is that when you find routes, it does several things. One, it helps you to identify what is likely to be exploited during a real engagement, which also helps you because chances are you're going to be doing pen testing at some point. And if you can figure out what vulnerabilities can be chained together to make a route into an attack route, that's great because you will be taking advantage of that. But it also helps you to identify what do I need to fix all of these things. And that's what the clients really like. What the client does not want. The client doesn't want, I did an audit recently, and within the first 3 hours, we had something like 30 vulnerabilities. Okay. So after a week, you have maybe hundreds, 100 possible vulnerabilities. The client doesn't want 1 to 200 vulnerabilities in a list. What they really want is they want attack routes that if actual bad guys were going to come in, this is what they would do. This is how they would break in. These are the things they would take advantage of. And then in the attack routes, you can say, but if you fix vulnerability 3, this entire route is no longer possible.
Sure.
And you should prioritize fixing vulnerability 3.
So maybe the report would be something like you'd have a list of every vulnerability you've discovered, but you'd also have a list of attack routes, and then you'd have a list of high priority vulnerabilities based on the attack routes.
Right. So usually when I'm writing a report, I kind of do it that way, right? So the report starts out the same way as all pen testing reports do, right? You've got the cover page, you've got the executive summary, the summary of the engagement.
Yeah, you probably want to put the big vulnerabilities up front for the flash factor.
Well, also for the executives, right? The executives, that's what the literal exec summary is. It's literally, we are going to read 1 page and 1 page only, summarize everything here. And then what I usually do is I usually then go into my attack routes. So that's where I'll map out every possible route that I discovered. And then I'll reference in a vulnerability index at the end every last possible vulnerability. So I'll say, okay, attack route 1, we did these things. We took advantage of 5 vulnerabilities, and this is how it was occurred. And you basically take the client on a little journey, right? So you take a lot of pictures and you say, okay, so here was vulnerability 1. Maybe the front gate was left unlocked and open during business hours, so you could literally drive into the parking lot and just park there, right? So that's definitely not something that you should definitely close the front gate. Okay, so we drove in, we took advantage of X, Y, and Z, and then before you knew it, we were in the server room. And you take them on a little journey. And then you say, okay, but if you solve this one problem, this one vulnerability, maybe vulnerability 3, this entire route is no longer possible. Yeah, sure, you have other vulnerabilities and you should definitely fix it at some point, and we'll give you the remediations for each one. But the top priority ought to be this. So, because again, the question becomes, how do you rank severity of vulnerabilities without routes? Is a window that's left cracked open, is that high? Well, okay, but what if the window's on the 5th floor?
Sure.
It's like, well, okay, so the vulnerability is on the 5th floor, so it's probably going to go from high to low, but at this, it all depends on how likely is it to actually be exploited. But it helps a lot if you kind of chain them into routes, both for you as the future pen tester, but also as for the client, what is actually likely to be taken advantage of here. Because I will tell you, from 20 years of doing this, you will have 100 vulnerabilities.
Well, thank you for making that clearer for me. That does bring up another question, though, about, realism. You said there may be an attack vector that's like, oh, yeah, I rappelled down and I used a glass cutter and I did this and I did that. So how do you go about, having the completeness required of a physical security audit while also being realistic in terms of what's going to happen and what's unlikely to happen?
Right. Okay, so this comes back to, you need to map out every last possible vulnerability, which is very difficult, right? Because if you think of something small, right? A small office, maybe it's a one floor office building and it has 2 entrances. That in and of itself, you probably won't have too many vulnerabilities that you're going to deal with. But now imagine if you're doing a hospital or a distribution center or a logistics center or something large, right? You may have so many vulnerabilities that you don't even, like, it may be hundreds of possible vulnerabilities, especially if you say, let's suppose for a minute that you've got doors that can be that have access control systems on them, but the hinge there's no dead latch on it, and you can simply shim the latch, right? The old Hollywood credit card trick. Okay, now what happens if every door in the building is that way? Do you list every door in the building? It's like, what if now seriously though? Imagine if 50% of the doors have that problem. You have to now list every last door that has that problem, because the client has to know which doors do I need to fix. So yeah, you're going to have a lot of these issues. And as an auditor, your ideal job is to map everything. But I will give you a tip. A lot of people start from the outside of the building. A lot of people will say, I'm going to walk the perimeter of the building and I'm going to see what I can do. And that's fine. It's a fine way to go about it. But remember, at the end of the day, there are certain things the client cares about the most. So oftentimes the client does not care you got in the building. Oftentimes the client cares you got into the building and you got into the CEO's office and you were able to bug his workstation. Or you got into the building and you got into the server room and no alarms went off. So remember, because there are certain things that the client will always care about, it may be more advantageous for you to start there and work your way out. Because
during an audit, because you don't have to do the outside first.
Right, so you can do it in any direction you want, but you want to become intimately aware with the building. You need to know every last nook and cranny, every last pathway in and out of everything. And you can start on the outside, that's fine. But most buildings, if you start on the outside of the building, once you get inside, you're going to have, 10, 15, 20 different ways to get from the outside of the building to the server room, right? There's pathways with random stairwells and hallways and cut-throughs and all this kind of stuff. But if you start with the server room itself and you insulate that, let's suppose for a minute that you insulate the server room in a way that it's not possible for somebody to break into it without setting off a series of alarms and what have you. Well, then how the person breaks into the building is far less consequential, because the crown jewels, the things that the client has said, this is the most secure or the most important part of it. If you start there and insulate that, well, that's the big problem. Now, this is where it comes down to situation, right? Because it may be more advantageous based on the client, the layout of the building and everything else, to stop them before they get in the building. It may be more advantageous to stop them at certain points, right? This is where man traps come in, right? Some places they'll let you get into the building, but then you get trapped in a man trap somehow. So the layout of the building, the requirements of the clients, what they're concerned about, all of this plays a role. But you don't necessarily have to start with the outside of the building. It may be more advantageous to start on the outside. It may be more advantageous to start at wherever the client says the crown jewels are.
Gotcha. So, and that might be, if a customer or if a client is already a little on a tight budget and they're doing an audit because they maybe can't afford a physical pen test.
Sure.
If their audit is shorter than maybe it should be, starting, on the inside with the crown jewels and working your way out might be a little bit more time effective if you are already time crunched during the audit.
That's true, but remember, your goal is to increase their security. And you should never agree to a job if you don't think you can do it at a professional level.
Like if you don't think that at the end of it, their security will be hardened.
Correct. So if a hospital, which has 1 million entrances and exits, asks me to do an audit and they're like, well, could you do it in a day? The answer is going to be no. There's no way I could do an audit in 1 day that would increase your security to an acceptable level.
Yeah, it's just a matter of professional credibility.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you should never agree to a job where you're like, oh yeah, this giant sprawling, like if somebody said, hey, here's a college campus or a hospital or a military installation or the Pentagon, and they're like, you could do that in a day, right? And it's like, no, I absolutely cannot. There's no possible way I can do this at a professional level.
Gotcha. So one of the things that you've said is that with an audit, you're attempting to map every vulnerability. In one breadth, I can see that being easier for a beginner because they can map them without necessarily having to take advantage of them. So say that they don't know how to pick a lock or they don't know how to do a certain technical skill.
Sure.
They can point out that it's a vulnerability without having to, take advantage of it. However, it presumes they know all the vulnerabilities,
Yes.
and that's a lot.
Yes.
So it's kind of
Well,
harder in that way too.
yes and no. So one of the reasons why I say that auditing is the single best way to get into pen testing is because with pen testing, you have to know what's vulnerable, right? So suppose that you're running a cyber pen test. And let's suppose for a minute that the website that you've been paid to do a cyber pen test on is vulnerable, that if you just add a few spaces in the username field, it just logs you in as admin for whatever reason, right? Instead of typing in your username, if you just add a couple spaces, for whatever reason, there's some syntax error or something, you break something and it just logs you in as admin. Okay, that's a vulnerability. But if you don't know that that's a thing, you don't know to test it. And you definitely don't know to check for it.
Gotcha.
So when you are running an audit, you will be, ideally before you run an audit, you will know as many vulnerabilities as possible. And when you run an audit, you should be doing your homework and you should be doing your research. I have had to go all over the world, and I've had to see a lot of locks and a lot of alarms and a lot of things I've never seen before, right? Somebody who's done pen testing in Texas their whole life, who goes to Taiwan or Japan, will see a lot of alarms and cameras and stuff they've never seen before.
Sure.
And you're not going to know ahead of time what is vulnerable, what's not. Is that, okay, it's like, okay, I see that camera is a wired camera, but the Ethernet port I could grab and plug into my device. But what's the protocol? Are they running, FTP? Is it an FTP communication where I can steal the plain text credentials? I don't know. I've never seen that camera before. So do your homework, right? So when you're running an audit, ideally, get as much... know as many vulnerabilities as possible ahead of time. What's vulnerable to bumping with a lock? What camera systems are vulnerable to the authentication? Just everything you possibly can. But then I guarantee you, when you get on site and you're doing this, you are going to run into things you don't know, because you can't possibly know everything. So have a protocol in place with how do I figure stuff out. But here's a really, really important part. Do not, under any circumstance, take a picture of an access control system with your phone, upload it immediately to ChatGPT and say, hi, I am at this location. Could you tell me what access control system this is and what it's vulnerable to? Or what the wiring diagram is or anything else? Because everything you upload to the cloud is there forever, okay? And if I said, hey, I happen to be inside the Danish Ministry of Defense office building. Here's a picture of their access control system. Could you tell me what this is vulnerable to? Well, okay, that's really, really bad because you're telling exactly where you are, and you will be telling that with metadata, by the way, most likely. Various.
So even if you don't say this
Right.
is where I am.
Correct. So various EXIF data, a lot of phones and things, they might even record lat long, like your GPS data when you take a picture. And it might be part of the metadata. And then you upload it to ChatGPT or something, and it's going like, oh, so this person took photographs at this location, and this is what's vulnerable to it, and this and this. So you'd have to scrub those images. Right, so you need to make sure that you remove all the EXIF data, you remove any kind of, identifiable things, and then you can upload it. But you do need to be doing your homework. So, and you'll see security protocols, right? So when you come to a certain country, you might start seeing locks with gold stars and this and that and other things that you've not seen before. Well, that country may have their own security protocols, their own security standards, and you need to look up, what does this mean? So yeah, you will have to do your homework. But the benefit of this is that by doing audits, you are allowed to make a lot of mistakes. Now, not mistakes in the sense of like, oh, I gave the guy bad recommendation. Mistakes in the sense of, I bet that door, I could use an under door tool on that door. And then you try it and you're wrong. Or you try it and somebody opens the door from the other side and there's an office in the other side, a meeting, and they're like, we saw this under door tool stick through. That would be a huge mistake in a pen test. But in an audit, it doesn't matter. Right? So you get to practice everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's assume then that you have all of the vulnerabilities identified and you've got them divided into attack vectors or attack routes. Do you have any examples of an attack vector that you use that was very effective that might help people picture what an attack route is, and then how you decided which vulnerability to fix for that route to close it?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so there was an audit that I did recently, and here was a series of vulnerabilities, right? So the front gate to the complex was left open during business hours. So I could just literally drive in and park my car in their area. Okay, so you could argue that's one or two vulnerabilities. The fact that the gate is open and the fact that anyone can come in and there's no checking of license plates or tags or anything else. So depending on how you want to argue that, that's one or two vulnerabilities right there. There was an easy method to get onto the roof of this building. That's another, and there's no, from the outside of the building, there's a very, very easy way to get onto the roof. So that's a problem. Again, nobody notices, nobody cares. So at this point, you've got a vulnerability or two where you can drive in, park there, you can get onto the roof very easily. And if you kind of walk around the roof, you'll find an access door that's probably only meant for personnel that are servicing the building, like HVAC and things like that. And that happened to be left unlocked. Okay, so here you've got a series of vulnerabilities that gets somebody from the outside of the building inside, and then once you're inside that area, you're inside the building, right? You have full access to the whole area. So here you have a chain of vulnerabilities, each one of which. So let's go back to the first one, right? The closing the front gate. If you close the front gate, does that entire route stop? It's like, not really, because I could hop the fence, right? So if you say, okay, I'm going to close the gate. Okay, but then I could just hop the fence. And if nobody cares or notices that you can hop the fence, if that's a vulnerability too, then that route is still viable. Okay, but now you can argue, what about the getting onto the roof easily? Well, that's a little difficult because I'm not going to go into how you get onto the roof, but that can be a difficult, very costly remediation, because they might have to put a lot of anti-climbing and other things, kind of methods to fix it all over the building. But if you say, okay, well, why was there? Now I didn't mention this, but why was there a dead zone on the roof? No cameras, no alarms, and the door was left unlocked. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, well, you could definitely make sure that door is basically impenetrable. You can set it up so that it's got a very good lock that's always locked, or an access control system. You've got it set up so that you can't shim it or use an underdoor tool or anything else. And if you've got unclonable cards or whatever, you drastically limit the ability to break in if you fix that door. Mm. And you go one step farther if you just add a camera up there that triggers an alarm if someone's up there, because why is someone on the roof? Mm-hmm. If you ask, so here's a common issue that I see. During the day, alarms and cameras are still functioning, but they're basically off, right? So all your alarms during the day in a lot of buildings are turned off by default. The cameras are still rolling, but the alarms are all off. Okay, but why does the camera and the alarm have to be off everywhere?
Sure.
Shouldn't certain areas, like if the client comes to you and says, if the server room goes down or something is stolen from there, our entire business is done, right? We are screwed. Okay, well, why is the alarm in that room ever off? That the alarm in that room should always be on. And any person who enters there, the facility manager, your on-site security, somebody should be getting an SMS and say, okay, somebody went in there, right? You don't need an SMS for, well, somebody, walked past the front door. You don't need your external cameras or whatever else sending SMSs to certain people. But whatever the client says, if this is the single most important thing to our entire company, if somebody got into the R&D room and stole our prize project, our company would be destroyed. Mm. Okay, why is the alarm in that room ever off? Right? So it's similar here. If you said, okay, we're going to harden that one door on the roof, and we're going to set it up so that there's a camera or an alarm or something on the roof, that if anybody ever goes up there, it will trigger, okay? Okay, well, then you've drastically cut the probability somebody can take advantage of that route. There might be other ways of getting in there. But again, if you think of every aspect of this, fixing it so that people couldn't climb up the building is a viable way to fix this, but it's very costly.
Sure.
Right? So you can't offer your clients things that are going to cost, if every remediation, say you have 100 vulnerabilities and every remediation is going to cost you $50,000 to $100,000, they're not all going to get fixed. Hardly any of them are going to get fixed.
So then once you have that route in mind, how do you choose which link in the chain needs to be the one that is fixed? Is it based on cost? Is it based on it's
based on a lot of things, right? So here, if I could fix the gate problem, that doesn't stop people from jumping the gate, right? They can always hop the gate. So it's always a possible way of getting inside. If I try to fix the climb over the building or climb on top of the roof thing, okay, so I fix climb on top of the roof, but that's really, really expensive. But if I fix the door, okay, well, how much does it cost you to make sure that the lock, like you swap out a lock to make sure it's a good hard lock, or it's got an access control system instead of a lock, and then you harden the door. Well, how much does that cost you? Not much.
Yeah,
right?
Maybe a few $100s.
Right, so maybe for a few $100s, and then put one camera up there that if somebody walks up there, if a person is detected, this facility manager, security, whatever, just gets a ping. Just to say, take a look at this and see if it's something we need to bother with.
And you could put it on the secure side of the door, so you could have it running literally 24/7 because nobody ever goes up there.
Right. You could. Well,
if you had it on the outside, you'd still have birds and stuff.
Well, that gets into a different question, but yeah. But yes, so you can. But here, you can solve that route with a relatively easy, cost-effective way, but as far as it's never going to be the same. Every building is going to be different. Because, for example, if this building that I'm referencing, let's suppose for a minute that there's a skylight, and on the skylight looks down onto their prized R&D room. Okay, well then in this case, it doesn't matter if I stop you from getting into the building. Because if I put a microphone on the glass or a camera up there, and I'm just listening in and watching your R&D area while you're building or doing whatever the crown jewels are, it doesn't matter if you get into the building. So it really depends on each client, the building architecture, what they say is important, what they say is valuable, how much it's going to cost to remediate, how easy it's going to be to remediate, and then your own personal expertise.
Gotcha. So you say every building is different, but are there any tiny, physical issues or vulnerabilities, things that most people ignore that you consistently see forming, a link in an attack route?
I would say that most people don't know what they don't know. And I'll give you an example. So in Europe, something like 95 to 98% of all European locks are Euro-cylinder locks. And Euro-cylinder locks can be snapped if they stick out. The vast majority of them can be snapped if they stick out even a few millimeters from the locking housing. That's a vulnerability that vast majority of people have no idea that's even a thing. But it allows attackers or would-be attackers to do forced entry into your wherever, house or office or whatever. But if you want to be covert, it's very trivial to set up a Euro-cylinder lock so that every key that fits inside of it will operate that lock. And if you get the same brand and same keyway as the original, and you snap their lock and you replace it with yours, well, then their lock or their key is still going to work, but so is yours, right? So what you've done is you've gotten persistence. And if for anybody who's ever seen a Euro-cylinder being snapped, it takes all of 5 seconds. It's not hard. You don't need to be really strong. It's very, very quick. So when it comes to little things like this, it all comes down to people don't even know about these things. So there's so many little vulnerabilities that people don't know. But I will say the single, regardless as to where in the world I am, because obviously, you're not seeing Euro-cylinder locks in North America, right? Or South America or Southeast Asia. But regardless as to where in the world I am, I would say that the single most common flaw I see is front-heavy security, which is the concept that all the security checkpoints are usually in one or two places on the perimeter where employees are expected to come in, and then once you get inside, there's no more security. And you basically have a flat physical network. Every person can go anywhere in the building. And as soon as you've gotten past that one secretary or that one access control system or whatever, everything else is just, okay, well, you must be allowed to be in here because how else did you get this far in? And that's probably the single most common thing that I see. And it's really perplexing because why does the intern need to have access to the entire building?
Sure. That's one of the questions that I have is, do you ever have customers that don't feel comfortable letting a bunch of vulnerabilities continue to exist, even after you've explained to them, the routes, and even if they know that they have a budget, things that they're just like, I don't feel comfortable, we need to fix everything. Do you ever have that happen?
You do have sometimes you do have people who really, really want to resolve everything. And usually those are the CISOs and those are the facility managers because it's their job. Their job is to secure the building. CISOs and facility managers often have some of the most difficult jobs because they're going to get two contradictory requests. Make sure that nobody, either from the internet or physically, can get into our systems, whether that's the building or the internet or the archive or the mainframe or whatever. And you have $5 to do it.
Sure.
Yeah, it's like, okay, well, I will fight the FSB and the GRU and the Mossad and the CIA and the NSA. I'll combat them all on my $5 budget.
Sure.
Right? So this is, it's very difficult. But you have to also keep in mind, if something does go wrong, it's their job.
Sure.
Right? Their job, their reputation. Would you hire, if a CISO had been fired because this company got catastrophically breached, would you hire the guy who's in charge of their security?
Absolutely not.
Right, exactly. So it's not just their job on the line, it's their reputation.
Sure.
And so they are trying to do everything they can to make sure that their company, their things are absolutely secure 100% of the time, but they're given usually a very, very shoestring budget to do it on. And
Sure.
that makes it incredibly difficult. But this is also why, as an auditor or a pen tester, it is vital that you not just list the vulnerabilities, you give them the most cost-effective but efficacious way of solving these problems.
Sure. So they can basically say, like, well, here's the budget, and we prioritize the exact vulnerabilities we were supposed to prioritize. If you wanted us to prioritize more vulnerabilities, then we would have needed more budget. So it kind of makes their job a little bit easier.
Correct.
I just know for me, as kind of a perfectionist, it'd be really hard to leave known vulnerabilities on the table.
Sure, but but that's the thing, right? Like it does. What you just mentioned is absolutely true. If the CISO turns around or the facility manager, whoever, turns around and says, look, this is the report we got. This is how much it's going to cost us to fix everything. I will prioritize what is the most important, but if you want to fix everything, this is what it's going to cost us.
Sure.
And so it also covers them. Because if the board of directors turns around and says, well, we can only afford to cover 25%, so 75% of the vulnerabilities are going to be there forever. Okay, if one of those vulnerabilities is taken advantage of, you can step back and say, dude, it's not my fault. I literally told you. I told you this was the problem.
Yeah. Now, do you ever have clients who push back against you on, say you've prioritized your vulnerabilities, and either they don't think that those are the best vulnerabilities or the most important vulnerabilities, or they don't think that they can be fixed?
So I have rarely, very, very rarely gotten pushback in that regard because the overwhelming majority of the time, the facility manager or the CISO or whoever your client contact is, the reason why you are there is because they understand there is a problem. They have hired you because they say, yeah, there is a big problem and we need your help to fix it. So when you make observations and prioritize findings, they will often say, okay, that makes sense to me. Now, they might give you pushback in other ways, but it's very rare that somebody is going to tell you, I think you're wrong about this. I mean, I will say this way. The types of people who typically would give you pushback on this are going to be people whose job is on the line. So, for example, if you have on-site security and during your audit, you were able to tailgate in and out of the building 50 times and the security never noticed, yes, your security officer may give you pushback and say, well, we knew you were here and that's why that, okay, but you never, like, all of your guards didn't know, and not once did anyone on my team ever get stopped, right? So, but they might give you pushback because fundamentally what you're saying is you didn't do your job well.
So then when it comes to, say you've got a list of hundreds of vulnerabilities, I know you said that routes is kind of how you help avoid client overwhelm.
Right.
But do you, like, when you're expressing the routes, is it just by text? Do you have graphics? Like, how do you sort of convey?
Right. So
yeah.
Generally speaking, the way that I do this is two ways. So ideally, I will use both a report and then a live on-site demonstration. So when I give the report, the way that so you've done the audit, you've put everything in a report, and when you do the report, ideally you will go to the client site, you give the report in person, go through the entire thing, and then oftentimes, if possible, take one or two of the client contacts or whoever is interested and just walk them through a route and say, like, this is how, this is why, and let them see for themselves. because again, hands-on, tactile, kind of being able to see it with your own eyes often really helps. But when you're doing the report, the way that I run the report, you have the attack routes, each one. So maybe you have, after an audit, maybe you have 5 different routes from A to B, right? From the outside of the building to the inside. And then maybe you have 2 routes from the inside, from an insider threat perspective to wherever. What you're going to do after that is you're going to have what I refer to as the vulnerability index, which just lists every last possible vulnerability. In the attack routes, what I do is I say, this vulnerability number 3, this is the top priority. If vulnerability 3 is resolved, then the entire route is remediated. And then you go to the vulnerability index and you figure out what that vulnerability is, and it tells you exactly how to fix it, right? And oftentimes you will have to give them options. So you can tell them things like in the index for a specific vulnerability, you can say, okay, look, here is the gold standard of what you should do, but here's how much roughly it's going to cost. Here is something you can do that will remediate the problem in the interim, but it is not the gold standard, right? So it's So a lot of times you're going to have issues where it's going to say, look, you literally cannot afford to do whatever the gold standard is for security on this thing. I know you can't, right? So let's take a cruise ship, for instance. If every single door on a cruise ship was vulnerable to, say, latch slipping, okay, fix every single door.
Sure.
So thousands of doors, right? So what you might have to do is you say, look, okay, so here the gold standard here is to, depending on the layout of the building, you might say put a metal strip on both sides or whatever to prevent any kind of latch slipping from top to bottom. But if they're gonna turn around, they're gonna say that's so much money.
Sure.
That's so much money. So then you might say, okay, we'll prioritize certain doors, certain access routes, certain places that are the most critical on the ship, right? And then you can also do X, Y, and Z that would secure the cabins of the passengers or something. But it all comes down to, sadly, money.
Sure.
Your client does not have an infinite budget. So you absolutely have to prioritize things. And that's just it. You cannot tell your client everything is critical, everything is high, and everything needs to be fixed.
Sure. Have you ever had a client who went against your recommendations and did not fix one of the highest vulnerabilities?
No.
No.
In 20 years, I can never think of a single person who did that because, again, you have been hired to fix a problem that they have identified. The chain of custody here is the client has identified a massive problem with their physical security. They've hired you to fix that security, and you have come to them and say, these are literally the most important things that should be prioritized immediately.
Sure.
I've never had somebody turn around and go, no.
Sure. All right. Then follow-up question. What's the most controversial or bizarre recommendation you've ever put in a physical audit report, and how did the client react?
Oh, God. The most bizarre... That will have to take some thinking. Okay, well here was one. So we had a client once who how do I want to say this? I have to say this in a way that won't give away who they are or where they are. This was a relatively big client in a downtown area of a major city, and because of the layout of the city and where the client building was, they had a really nice balcony that overlooked this really perfect scenic vista. And it was very common for people to come and ask to go up onto that balcony and take photographs. And for various PR reasons, the client almost always said yes. But the problem with doing that was that you were on a regular basis allowing completely unknown people through the building, up several flights of stairs, onto a balcony, and then oftentimes you would leave them unsupervised while they were taking photographs and other things, and you'd let them go to the bathroom, and you'd let them wander around, and you can see that that's a huge problem, right? So it's a relatively simple fix, but having random strangers wander through your building is definitely not something you want to do. But the client was adamant that for various PR reasons, like, we always want to be able to make sure that this is something that we allow people to do. We don't want to come across as a company that says, no, absolutely not, this is ours and you can't have it. So, I've had a lot of very interesting clients before, but at the end of the day, a lot of the remediations will come down to the same kinds of things, because most organizations, they all kind of run the same, in the sense of, like, they have either, let me say it this way. Clients, by and large, can be lumped into two categories. Clients that are concerned with merchandise and clients that are concerned with IP. Clients that are concerned with merchandise typically are not concerned with covert entry. They're concerned with smash and grab. Laptop stores, Apple stores, the Louvre, wherever. Things that they're most concerned with people breaking in quickly, grabbing everything they can and running. So they're not concerned with state entities. The jewelry store down the street is not concerned that the FSB is going to sneak an agent in to bug their back room.
Sure.
Right? But at the same time, the larger companies, say Deloitte. One thing that Deloitte might be very concerned about is if somebody figured out who all their clients are, or the types of things they're doing on sales, or their projections, or how they're planning on capitalizing the market next year, or anything like this, right? So there are companies that are concerned with IP, and there are companies that are concerned with merchandise. And how you ask and remediate each is going to be completely dependent based on what is their big concerns. So it's tricky, right? So when you talk about what is the weirdest thing that I've had to do or recommend, it's very, very difficult because I've had to make a lot of recommendations. So when you have, for instance, the Louvre, you had what? I think the budget is hundreds of millions of dollars per year. You had hundreds of security staff, but their standard operating procedure is that if security was threatened in any way, shape, or form, run away. Okay, so if anybody's ever seen the Thomas Crown Affair, in that movie, when the bad guys are trying to steal the painting, all the security officers pull out cattle prods and start, beating the bad guys with, basically tasers. But in this instance, it seems that the standard operating procedure for your security staff was if we are threatened, run away, which means that you have security theater.
Sure.
Okay, so a recommendation would be have a firearms office. A recommendation could be have a firearms officer on site. And humorously, that's almost exactly what Paris decided when they said, well, we're going to put a police station right next to the place. And it's like, that's fundamentally what you're doing. Fundamentally, what you're doing is you're saying, we're going to put a police station right next to the Louvre so that if anything ever happens like this again, we have armed people on site who can deal with this. The humorous aspect of that recommendation is the bad guys at the Louvre heist were in and out in about 10 minutes. I don't know if you could call the police and have them on site in 10 minutes, even if they were right next door. That's a really fast response time, especially when you realize the Louvre is huge. It's a massive complex. So if you call the police, so if it took the bad guys 10 minutes to get in and out, and when they got out, they were on little e-scooters and they just zipped away, right? Well, think about the size of the Louvre. And think about the fact that the alarms didn't go off or the people didn't realize they were having a problem at the 0 minute mark, right? Maybe it's the 3, 4, 5 minute mark where like, oh my God, somebody's trying to break in. Like actually breaking in and the security's being threatened with axle grinders. Okay, call the police then. Make that phone call. How long does it take to make that phone call and have police on site? I don't think it's 5 minutes.
Definitely not.
So if you had security guards who were armed or their standard operating procedure was to actually combat these people in a way that they felt comfortable doing, that might solve the problem. But saying that we're going to put security officers next door and they'll be able to be on site and respond to these threats in under 10 minutes, I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, or if you closed up every exit or whatever you might have. Like
exactly. If you had some type of way of locking people inside.
It's like grab what you want. Threaten us.
Sure, and you do see this in kiosks and other shops where people just lock the bad guy inside. They flee out a back door. They turn the entire kiosk or the entire vestibule or whatever into a man trap. It's like, all right, have fun, buddy. And it's like, yeah, you can be in my store and you can wreck stuff and you can have a bad day, but you're stuck here until the police arrive.
Sure.
So there are lots of ways to remediate this problem, but now think about it. Which of these two things is going to be cost effective?
Yeah.
Every room in the Louvre has to be turned into a man trap versus a guy with a gun.
Sure.
Right? So it's one of these things but the problem is you're in Europe and they don't like guns. And so that's its own issue.
So if you could magically make every security manager in the world understand one thing about physical auditing, what would it be? It's
not a compliance testing. When you hear security auditing, what they think is you're coming through with a checklist and you're making sure that it's like OSHA compliant type of thing. That's not what you're doing. You're going through and you're looking at every possible vulnerability from an attacker's lens, and you're saying, if I was to break into this facility, which of these vulnerabilities would I take advantage of to do it? And let me say it this way, for every facility manager out there, for every employee out there, take 5 minutes and think to yourself, if I had to break into my own office, how would I do it? I'm willing to bet that the overwhelming majority of people who are listening to this would say, I know exactly how I'd break into my own office, and I know how I'd get away with it.
Sure.
That doesn't mean you're James Bond. Now, maybe you are, but it means that their security is so low that anybody who spent any time doing recon, which is what you're doing as an employee, you're passively doing reconnaissance, you know exactly the flaws. You know how you would break in, steal everything, or do something disruptive and get out without getting caught. You all know this. And it's because your current security standard your posture is so low that anyone could get in and do whatever they wanted to do. So auditing is the first step. It's a great way for black teams or physical pen test teams to train up. It's the first thing that clients need. The overwhelming majority of clients need an audit. They don't need a pen test. For the same reason why, if you as an employee can say, I bet I could break into my own office, then you don't need a pen test. You need an audit. Fix that first.
Sure. So I know you said that auditing is a great way for black teams to learn. Can you talk a little bit more about the skills that auditing will build up so that you can prepare for a physical pen test? And is there anything that you recommend about how they approach the audit so that they can train up for a physical pen test?
Identify all the skill sets for yourself and that you are good and bad at, and then practice each one. If you are a master of picking locks, okay, well then you could pick locks on an audit, but there's no point. Right? If you want to do it for practice, fine. But if you are a master of lockpicking, but you are socially awkward, okay, then during audits, talk to every employee. During an audit, see if you can show up and spin them a tale, spin them a yarn, and say, no, I'm here to test the HVAC system, and see if they can buy it. Right?
Yeah.
So figure out what you're good at, what you're bad at, and what you really don't know, and then during audits, practice them all. Right? Because remember, you are there to test their security. And part of the test is, can I get people to do things? Can I test things? If you need a lot of work on lockpicking and you're like, man, I just really need to practice this. Practice it. Practice your lockpicking. Practice your door bypassing. Practice your building scaling. Practice your social engineering. Practice whatever skill you think you need practice on. And even if you just need a refresher, it's been a month or 2 or 3 since I've bypassed a European tilt window. Okay, go practice it. See if you can, right? Get that skill under your belt, because on a real engagement, you got to do it in a covert way where you can't get caught.
Sure.
But one of the skills that I say is non-negotiable, that pen testing or auditing, well, maybe not auditing, but every pen tester in the world, arguably the most important thing you could possibly have is an escape clause. Okay, the single biggest thing that you will need is an escape clause. If you find yourself in a bad situation where somebody is accosting you, an employee, a security guard, whoever, and they say, who are you? Why are you here? How are you getting out of that situation? In a way that accomplishes 2 things. 1, you get away without getting in handcuffs. And 2, you can return with no issue. Right? Yes, I can dive out of a window and run, but I definitely can't return. So you need to practice your escape clauses, practice talking to people, practice your social engineering, practice interacting with human beings, and most importantly, practice identifying vulnerabilities. Because if you've done a pen test in the past and you said, well, when we did a pen test, we tailgated into the building. We tried to clone a badge with a flipper. It didn't work. And that was the pen test. You have not done a good pen test, and you have not done that client a good service, right? So practice identifying vulnerabilities. Learn things. Learn what is vulnerable. Learn what can be taken advantage of. And here's the really hard part. Practice remediation. Because it's not just about find all the vulnerabilities or find all the attack routes or anything else. How are you solving it for your client? And you can't just say, the gold standard of doors and the gold standard of windows on every door and every window and they can't afford that. Right? You can't go into a client and say, well, I've done your pen test or your audit. Now spend $10 million fixing everything.
Sure. So is there anything, besides the escape clause, for example, is there anything you don't get from auditing that you can really only learn once you're doing a live black team operation?
How to deal with stress. How to deal with stress. So it's the one thing that you're not going to be able to do on an audit is how do you handle stress? When you are doing audits, there's basically no stress. But when you're doing a real engagement, an actual black team engagement, you will be stressed. Your heart's going to be pounding. You're going to be sweating. Your hands are going to tremble. It's going to be late. It's going to be cold. Maybe you're really good at lock picking, but now it's 3 a.m. It's cold outside. It's raining, and you're doing it while people are walking around, and you got to be covert about it, right? That changes everything. Maybe you know how to get into the little the little key boxes that everybody has, that every Airbnb in the world has. If you're doing it in a warm, calm setting at your desk at your house, but then when you put it at ankle height in the front of a building, when people are walking back and forth on the sidewalk and it's raining and it's cold, suddenly that changes everything, right?
Sure.
So the one thing that you can't practice on an audit is how to manage stress.
Gotcha. For people coming to the PACT course this weekend, what mindset should they arrive with to get the most out of the course?
Engage. Don't be afraid to offer suggestions, remediations, ideas. Like, the whole point of learning is that you're there to learn, right? You will get more out of any course, whether it's anything, whether it's improvisation classes or acting classes or pen testing classes or auditing class. You will get far more out of any class that you take if you participate. Yeah, you're going to be wrong. Yeah, you're going to make mistakes, but that's the whole point, right? If you just sit back and you're like, well, I'm too embarrassed, or I'm too shy, or I think I have an answer, but I don't know, you have to get rid of that, right? You have to get rid of all of that, because you will get far more out of any class, no matter what it is, if you participate in something.
Yeah, just like an audit is a really good practice pen test, the PACT course is a really good practice audit.
Yeah, effectively, yes. And there's the one thing that you have to understand is when you're offering remediations on things, there's no right or wrong. There's trade-offs. If you've got an attack route with 5 vulnerabilities and you say, well, we're going to fix everything at vulnerability 2, and other people say, no, we're going to fix vulnerability 5. There's no right or wrong. It's just here are the pros and cons of doing each one.
Sure.
Right? It's not like there's a down from on high objective answer that is correct here. It's just, no, if we do it here, this is the pros, these are the cons, and if we do it over here, these are the pros and these are the cons. It's all trade-offs.
Sure. And lastly, if someone listening to this podcast today wants to start doing their own physical audits, what would you say is a good starting point to be learning these skills?
So, I mean, obviously for a plug, I'm going to say take the auditing course, but
Sure.
If you don't want to, you can't afford it or whatever, start by trying to ask the question, how would you break into your own building, your own apartment, your own thing? Start looking at things through a attacker's lens, and then try to learn as many possible vulnerabilities as you can. Because there's going to be all kinds of things. Most people will look at alarms, they'll look at locks, but you don't know what you don't know. And so let's go back to the European Euro cylinder lock. A huge majority of people do not know that you can snap and drill those locks in 5 seconds. And even fewer people know that with a little bit of reconnaissance and a little bit of prep, you can swap those locks out for something that would work with any key, even the original. Like, most people don't realize that. And they don't realize that if somebody's actually committed to doing this, they can be on your lock, like walk up to the door, and they can be gone with replacing it in under 1 minute.
Yeah.
It's like, and that's the aspect that, so people don't know what they don't know. So study as much as you can and try to identify as many vulnerabilities as you can. But start with, quote unquote, auditing your own office or even your own apartment, right? And just get in the habit of identifying, every vulnerability you can see: dead zones, alarms that are miscalibrated, alarms that are placed in the wrong place, Euro cylinder locks that are sticking out too far, tailgating opportunities, doors that are left unlocked, like anything. Just identify something and say, okay, that's a vulnerability. And then ask the question, how would you fix it?
Sure. Thanks for joining us for today's deep dive into physical auditing. We hope it gave you a clearer view of how testing order, vulnerability mapping, and real-world practicality shape the way physical security assessments actually deliver value.